we'll get started. Awesome. So thank you all so much for coming to an Intro to Route Reading Masterclass. I am super excited to show you all what I've come up with. And I do really want this Masterclass to be very interactive. So I can't see the chat while I'm sharing my screen, but I would love for you all to interact with each other, pop some answers in the chat with each other, kind of collaborate in there during the Masterclass. And then if you do have questions, I'll be doing a Q&A at the end. So kind of save your questions to pop into the chat at the end there. And I really love hearing from you. I really love interacting with you all. So if there's anything from the presentation that really resonates with you or that really gives you a good takeaway, I love to hear from you. So my Instagram is on the left here at Juliet_Amanda. And yeah, shoot me a DM if there's anything that you really liked, or you can take a screenshot of any of these slides and post them and tag me on Instagram. I love to hear from you. All right, so first I just wanted to introduce myself before we dive in. So my name is Juliet Hammer, and I'm a coach who helps climbers of all levels gain confidence on the wall through strength and technique coaching. My educational background is that I have a bachelor's degree in biology. I am a certified strength and conditioning specialist, as well as a certified precision nutrition coach. As far as climbing accomplishments go, I have been climbing since 2005. And I originally did a lot of competition climbing. So some of my notable results include second place in the 2014 Collegiate Climbing Nationals, as well as 11th place in the 2017 Open Sport Climbing Nationals. And now I primarily enjoy climbing outside and in particular bouldering outside. And I've bouldered multiple V11s with 30 ascents, V10 and up. So just an outline of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to start with the purpose of route reading. We're going to go through sequencing, body positioning. We're going to talk all about flash attempts, and then we'll go through the process of trial and error. And then at the end, like I said, there's going to be a Q&A. So save any questions you have for the end, and I will do my best to answer this. Okay, so starting with the purpose of route reading. And before I start to say anything about this, I want you to do a little bit of reflecting. And I want you to think back on a time where maybe you got to the gym or to the crag, you were really excited and you just immediately hopped on a climb without really looking at it. And I want you to think about first, what happened? How did it go for you? And second, how did it make you feel? So just reflect back on a time, we've all done it, where we just hopped on a little bit quickly onto a climb. And then I want you to now think about a time where you really took your time to read a climb, make sure you knew exactly what you wanted to do. And I want you to think about what happened when you did that, when you hopped on the wall after doing that, and also how you felt after taking the time to really route read and look at a climb. You can definitely pop those in the chat if you want. So the number one purpose of route reading is to conserve energy. So not only are you going to get better quality tries with route reading, you're also very likely going to use fewer attempts on a climb. And ultimately, that's going to lead us to what we all want to do as climbers, which is to get on more climbs. So if you think about how much capacity you have in any given day on any given session. Let's say you really have like 15 really good tries in the tank. If you don't route read, you kind of just hop on, let's say a climb that could have taken you only 3 tries ends up taking you 7 or 8. And there you've burned through already half of your really good attempts, your really good tries. So you're going to have less capacity to get on different climbs. So that's one reason why route reading is really crucial. The second is going to be that it is going to improve your confidence. So you're going to have an idea of what to expect. So maybe you thought back on that time where you just hopped on the wall. There might be a little bit of panic where you realize, oh my gosh, I don't know where any of the feet are. I don't know where this next hold I'm going to is. So when you have an idea of what to expect, when you have a plan going into the climb, you're going to improve your confidence on the wall. Things obviously don't always go as as according to plan, but you are going to have at least an idea of what you can expect. And then also, it is a really awesome mental exercise. So route reading is going to really start helping you hone in and practice those critical thinking skills. That's ultimately going to help you on harder climbs where you have to break down tricky crux moves. So this is a really great way to make sure that you are starting to get into that mental zone of critical thinking with climbing. Okay, so next we are going to move on to sequencing. And if we just think about the word itself of sequence, all it is just an order of operations. And in climbing, we have a hand sequence, so the order that you're moving your hands. We have a foot sequence, so again, just the order that you're moving your feet. And then we have a combined sequence, right? So you're not necessarily going hand, hand, foot, foot. Sometimes you make one hand move, and then off of that one hand, you have to do a series of foot moves, or you do one foot moves and you make a series of hand moves. So the combined sequence is how you move as a whole, the order of operations of your entire body. All right, so we're going to start with a kind of mental exercise here. We're going to workshop this blue boulder. And one note I want to make before you dive into that is that these climbs are at, if you're local to Colorado, they're at the Denver Bouldering Club North location. And these are actually set for a USA Climbing youth competition. So in that format, the starting position is marked by pieces of tape, and each piece of tape represents a limb, so either a hand or a foot. So just keep in mind that that is just the way that it's set, and this will be the starting position is one limb per piece of tape. So first, we're just going to go down in the order that we just talked about. We're going to start with the hand sequence, and this is because really the hand sequence is what's going to guide the rest of the body. So if you just want to go through really quick mental exercise, think about, okay, where would you put your hand on this boulder? All right, so here is one hand sequence. So you start left and right hands on those starting tape pieces. And this one is a pretty simple and straightforward climb. We're going right, left, right. We bump our left hand once, and then we go right hand and bump to the finish. Like I said, this is just one solution. There are multiple sequences that we'll talk about later. So next, we're going to move on to the foot sequence. So now that we have our hand sequence down, I want you to think about what order you might put your feet in to support that hand sequence that you chose. So again, just take a couple of seconds, think through it. All right, so footholds are in pink here. This is the foot sequence that supports that first hand sequence that I showed you. Again, there are multiple solutions to this, so this is just one way. If your way was similar to this, awesome job. And then lastly, what we're going to do is think about the combined sequence on this boulder. So now we're combining the hands and the feet, and the best way to go about thinking about this combined sequence is to use an exercise called visualization. And all that is imagining yourself on this climb, visualizing yourself on this climb. So if you were to grab onto those start holds, would you move your right hand first and then your left hand, or maybe you'd move your right hand, then move a foot up. So really just visualize yourself on this climb, think about this combined sequence, and then we're gonna go ahead and watch John do it. So I'll give you a couple seconds to do that. All right, so here goes John. So was that pretty similar to what you were thinking? Again, pop it in the chat if you want. Just for reference, John is 5'6". And like I said, this was a USA Climbing youth comp. So typically these easier climbs were set for smaller bodies. So this is just a really good way to demonstrate that there's often more than one sequence, and there's often different sequences for different body types. So again, this exercise of route reading, this exercise of visualization is going to be really good for practicing with your own dimensions so that you become familiar with what works for you, even if you see someone else doing a different sequence, knowing that, okay, well, you know, if I put myself on that same climb, it's going to look a little different because I have these different dimensions. And as you do this more and more, you're just going to become more comfortable with this process. So we're going to watch a few different sequences on this blue climb. This one on the left is the one that we just watched. So I'm going to go ahead and start with this middle climb. So here John is able to skip quite a few holds and do the climb in quite a bit fewer moves. So again, different dimensions is often going to result in slightly different sequences. And then this one on the right, he's choosing a little bit more of an unconventional sequence. He decided to go left hand first, but it still worked. He was still able to execute the boulder. So yeah, really playing around with different sequences, feeling what feels good, what doesn't feel as good. It's just going to help you, again, become more comfortable with this process. All right. So next, we are going to talk about body positioning. So we just talked about the hands and the feet, which are the parts of the body that are actively in contact with the wall. And body positioning is all about the body parts that aren't in contact with the wall, but they have a really big impact on your movement. And as far as body positioning goes, I really just like to break the body down into three main movement systems. So I think about the hips quite a bit, and the hips are just going to be what controls your lower body, the shoulders, and that's going to be what controls that upper body, and then the core, which is going to be the trunk that connects both your lower and upper body. So all of these are really important to think about when we are talking about body positioning. And there are definitely a number of different factors that affect the way you position your body, but the primary one that I'm going to be focusing on here tonight is going to be the direction of the holds. So to talk further about that, we're going to look at this green climb. And so this climb is quite a bit different than that blue climb we just looked at. And the main difference is that there's some directionality to these holds. So I want you to think about what the best way to pull on each of these holds are based on the direction that they're facing. And to do this, you can think about, okay, if I were to go up to the wall and grab this hold, what way would it feel the best to pull on it? So go ahead and think about just the hand holds for right now. Think about that for a second. All right, so overwhelming number of arrows, but we're just going to take it piece by piece here. So we're starting on these two holds, and these first holds, they're kind of opposing each other here. And then everything is not too severe with the directionality until we get to this upper section here. And that's where we really see some of these more side pulling type holds. And then again, more towards the end, we do have some directionality, but not quite as severe. All right, and so we're going to do the same thing with the footholds. I want you to think about the directionality of the footholds on this climb. So again, if you were to walk up and try and just stand on those footholds, what would be the best direction to push on them? So I've put the arrows here in red, and what we can see is that the footholds are actually fairly straight up and down. There's not too much directionality to them. So that's definitely a factor to take into consideration when we're thinking about reading this climb. Okay, so now we're going to do that same exercise. We're going to combine that sequencing that we just did. So you're going to be thinking about, okay, how would I actually want to go about grabbing these holds. And now we've added in that idea of directionality. So now again, imagine yourself on this climb. Think about how you would position your body throughout this climb. Really visualize it and think how you would execute it. So I'll give you a couple of seconds here again to do that. All right, so now we're gonna watch John do it. So I know we talked about the hips, the shoulders, and the core. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna watch this video through a few times. This first time, I want you to focus on John's hips. All right, so go ahead, pop in the chat. What did you all notice about John's hips throughout this climb? Yeah, share some answers with each other and then we'll talk about it here. So I'm gonna play it through one more time. And what we're gonna do is I'm just gonna pause it through different frames of the climb here. And what we can see is when he's here in the beginning, his hips are pretty nice and square to the wall. He's really positioning himself straight under the holds, again, because there's some directionality, but it's not too severe. So he is able to just kind of stay up and down, nothing too wild with the body positioning there. And then if we continue to play it through, what we see here is as he gets into these much more directional holds, he has to start kind of twisting and turning his hips and body and position it in a way where he's going to feel like he can best pull on those holds. So here he's turned his right hip into the wall, and that's really allowing him to pull to the right on this left hand hold and reach through with his hand. And then if we play through this next move, right, he does the exact opposite, right? So he's turned his left hip into the wall so that on this right hand, he's able to pull more to the left there. So he's really just trying to optimize his body positioning to allow for the most force to be produced on each of these holds. And then again, he gets to more of this down pulling section. Nothing too severe with the body positioning here. So now we're going to watch it again. And this time I just want you to watch the shoulders here. All right, so one thing that you might have noticed from watching his shoulders is, yeah, there was a little bit of turning there, but not nearly as much as with the hips. And that's because the hips are your center of gravity. So when you think about body positioning, a lot of the times everything originates from the hip area. So the hips are going to be doing the heavy lifting of that body positioning. That's really where you want to manipulate in order to get into that best position. And again, you know, sometimes you'll have those cross moves where you really are turning your shoulders, but more times than not, you're also going to be moving your hips as well. So that's one of the reasons why I really emphasize the hips in my coaching, is that they really do drive a lot of this body positioning. And then lastly, we'll just go ahead and watch his core. All right, so again, we really didn't see a ton of movement in the core, and that's because one of its main roles is really playing that stabilization role, as well as connecting the upper and lower body. So it did, you know, twist and turn with the hips, but the core itself didn't move too much. So again, really emphasizing the hips, and everything else kind of follows from there. All right. And so with that, I just want to give you a quick reminder about route reading and climbs in general. And that is to say that simple does not always equal easy. And to clarify a little bit more, mentally simple does not always equal physically easy. So there's always two pieces to a climb. And that's one of the reasons why we all love this sport is not only does it push you physically, but you also have this huge mental aspect to climbing. So even if something is not very difficult for you to figure out, that doesn't always mean that it's going to be easy to physically climb. So a really easy example of this would be a crimp ladder where you just go right, left, right, left, right. But turns out that each of those holds are like 6 millimeters. They're glassy texture, they're kind of sloping. So again, simple does not always equal easy. And on that same vein, I also want to say that tricky does not always mean difficult. So again, clarifying, mentally tricky does not always mean physically difficult. And I think this is something that really discourages a lot of people, especially on maybe some of these kind of trickier gym climbs where we're getting into more of this kind of comp-like setting. And sometimes if we're not able to figure out a move, we just say, oh, I can't do it, and kind of give up and move on. But I do want to remind you that you could very well be very physically capable of doing a climb. It's just this mental piece that's kind of holding you back. So I want to challenge you to really dig in, lean into the learning process and see if you can figure it out mentally. With any new climb, for example, if you get on something and your first try, you don't feel like you do really well, and then all of a sudden by the 5th try, you've figured it out and you succeed and you send the climb. Well, you didn't all of a sudden get stronger between try 1 and try 5. You figured it out mentally, you had it click mentally, and that's what resulted in that progress. So just remember, if something is frustrating you with route reading, remember, you could very well be very physically capable and take on that mental challenge of trying to figure it out. I really encourage you to do that. All right, so we're going to put everything we just talked about together, the sequencing and the body positioning, the visualization, everything we just practiced, and we're going to try and read this yellow boulder. This is one I would call tricky difficult. So I don't know if you all have ever climbed on these holds. I call them the banana holds. I hate them. They're really hard. So go ahead, think through it. I'm going to give you all about a minute to visualize yourself on it, try and figure out the sequence, and then we're going to watch it in action. Take about 30 more seconds. If you feel like you've figured it out, go ahead and type in the comments where you think the crux might be on this climb. Where do you think the hardest part is? All right, I know it was a quick minute, but we'll go ahead and watch this and see how John does it, how it matches up with what you were thinking. Yay, good job, John. So yeah, reflect on what you visualized, how you read it compares to how John just did it there. And also, if you were thinking about what you had identified as the crux, we're going to talk through that now. So on this particular climb, this section where he kind of had to press up pretty hard, I would consider to be the crux section of this climb. And that's because if we put these direction arrows on the hands and on the feet, we know exactly what the best way is to produce force on these climbs. And that is about perpendicular to their surfaces there. And the tricky part of it is based on where the feet are, you can only pull so far on these holds. So you can pull to your armpit on this yellow hold, but it's not going to get you far enough or be able to get you over onto this hold. So what John was able to do was to switch it to this pushing motion and was able to produce that same directionality and that same force on the hold. He just had to think a little bit critically about it and say, okay, well, pulling isn't going to work. I have to switch this. And the same thing happened on this left hand hold, right? Like he wasn't really able to pull on it. He like switched it to a palm and squeezed and compressed and pushed his way up to eventually be able to get this weight onto the left foot there. So definitely one of those climbs that makes you think out of the box a little bit more, makes you think again, critically about, okay, how am I best going to be able to get up this? How am I going to best be able to use each of these holds? All right, so before we move on, I did just want to give you a note on varying terrain. So I know all of the climbs that we have looked at so far have been indoor gym boulders, but all of these tactics do also apply to outdoor climbing as well as routes. So I'm just going to talk through both of those really quickly. So underlying theme is what you practice is what you're going to get good at, right? So if you want to get good at reading outdoor climbing, you have to go out and practice reading outdoor climbs. There are quite a few differences between indoor and outdoor climbing. The big one is that there's so many more subtleties with the holds outside. So not only are they harder to spot, right? We don't have this bright contrast, this bright colored hold. They're a lot trickier to spot, but also the holds tend to be much more uneven. There's going to be many more nuances to how you grab those holds. You know, maybe there's a good part on only, you know, half of the hold and you have to figure out how to grab it just right. So that's one of the big differences between indoor and outdoor climbing. And I will say, if you are switching from one to the other, that give yourself some grace, let yourself, you know, really get into the learning process, understand that as you gain experience, you're going to get better at it. But if it's your first time climbing outside, give yourself a little bit of room to learn. And same thing if you're going from outdoor climbing to indoor climbing. I think if I was climbing outside for months on end, and then I went into a gym and saw this compy, you know, parkour style climb, I would have no idea how to read it. It would take that practice and getting familiar with those kinds of moves. So just remember that what you practice is what you are going to get better at. And then as far as routes go, we can use a very similar process for this, but what we're going to do is break that route into different sections. So just break them up into mini boulders. And again, the more you practice reading rope climbs, the better you're going to get at it. So for example, if you break the route into small sections, and you identify, hey, this beginning sequence is pretty straightforward. I don't need to think about that one as much. And then you identify a crux sequence higher up and you say, okay, I'm going to spend a little bit more time trying to figure this one out, really looking at the directionality of the holds, really thinking about the sequence, and then just going through that same process piece by piece there. So next we are going to talk about flash attempts, but first I just wanted to announce that my newest program, Beta U, is open for enrollment. I am super excited about this program. It is all about climbing training movement. So if you've been enjoying what we've been talking about here tonight, this could be a really great fit for you. It's going to be a very educational training program where we're going to be hopping on calls like this. It's going to be also a very community-based program. So just like I've been asking you all to interact in the chat here tonight, it's going to be the same thing on our group calls. We're going to have this very collaborative environment where we're all bouncing ideas off of each other. And also, most importantly, we're going to be supporting and uplifting each other. So tonight, I wanted to announce that the program will be $100 off for the next 24 hours. And also, if you apply in the next 24 hours, you will get a free 30-minute call with the program. So like I said, if this has really been resonating with you and you think you might be a good fit for this, I would absolutely love to have you apply. We already have 5 amazing members in the group, and I'd love to have you in it. All right, so moving on to flash attempts. If you follow me on Instagram, you kind of already know my thoughts on flash attempts, but last month I did a poll asking everyone if they usually try to flash a climb or not. And there was definitely mixed answers, but I also asked, you know, why you do often try to flash climbs or why you don't. And usually for the folks who don't try to flash climbs, it's usually more of this fear of failure, and because with flash attempts, you only get the one try, and it can be a really easy black and white thinking of, okay, well, I succeeded or I failed. But in my opinion, every climb deserves a flash attempt. And there are many, many, many benefits to trying to flash climbs. So one is that you're going to be testing your decision-making process. So there's really not many other situations where you're getting on the wall and you have to make these snap decisions. So even if you've tried to get as much information as you could from the route reading process, sometimes you get up there and it's just different than what you expected. Maybe you grab a hold and you're like, wow, that is way worse than I thought it was going to be. And right then you have to make a decision. Okay, am I going to go with my original plan? Am I going to change what I was originally thinking? So really testing that decision-making process. And along with that, it's also going to force you to try and dig in and trust your intuition. So you get up to that hold that's not as good as you thought it was, and your gut tells you, okay, like, you know, change the plan, we're going to go with something else. Whether or not you decide to trust that gut feeling is going to be very revealing of your climbing and potentially some mindset areas that you could work on. And then lastly, it also forces you to dig into this different kind of try hard. So like I said, a flash attempt, you get one of them. For a lot of people, when you get on the wall and you know you only have that one chance, you're going to just dig in and try really hard on that flash attempt. There's also so many lessons that you can learn from a flash attempt. So one being, which types of moves do you typically have difficulty reading, right? So if you notice a trend where you try to flash a climb, you don't flash it, you get on for a second try and you're like, oh, wow, I really should have used a heel hook there. And you notice that a lot of times when you try to flash climbs, you find yourself missing the heel hooks. Well, that could be a really good way to realize, hey, maybe I should practice my heel hooks more so that I can understand that move better and better know when to apply it. Another lesson that you can learn from flash attempts is which types of moves do you hesitate on? So a really common move that people tend to hesitate on is going to be dynamic moves. So maybe a dynamic move wasn't in your plan when you originally were looking at the climb, but you get on the wall and you're like, oh shoot, like I kind of have to jump for this. If you find yourself hesitating, kind of pushing that intuition or that gut feeling aside and saying, no, there's got to be a way to do this statically. I really don't want to go for it. That's again, a really good indication that maybe dynamic moves would be a really good area for you to focus on. It could mean that you just need to practice more dynamic moves so that you can feel more confident on the go, to just say, okay, it's dynamic, I'm going to go for it. So again, another really great lesson from flash attempts. And then lastly, what new information did you learn from that first flash attempt for a second try if you didn't complete the flash? So realizing when you get back on again, oh, like I really didn't grab that hold right, or it wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be. All of that information you get from that first try is going to inform how you approach that second try. You're able to take a step back with that new information, rethink the sequence, rethink the body positioning. So again, it really just helps you take this more critical thinking approach to climbing. There are a few exceptions for flash attempts. So the first being, if you're not properly warmed up and you're trying to flash a really hard boulder, an injury is never worth a flash attempt. And this is a lesson I learned the hard way with my very first finger injury. I was outside, really hadn't warmed up at all. It was winter and cold, and I just crimped a little too hard before my fingers were warmed up, and it was definitely not worth the finger injury. And I also didn't flash the boulder. So if you're not properly warmed up, it's okay not to try to flash a climb. You might be better off trying to just pull on some holds, hold some positions, but not necessarily trying to flash it off the ground. A second one would be safety concerns. So if you are trying a high ball boulder and you don't want to flash it from the ground up, instead you could, throw a rope down on it, rappel down, practice those higher moves on top rope. That's another great example of when a flash attempt might not be appropriate. And then lastly, the mental energy. So like I said, all of this takes a lot of mental energy. And especially for hard flashes, if you are just not feeling it that day, it's okay. You don't have to force yourself to try and flash climbs. But if it's something that you can slowly start incorporating into your routine a little bit more, there are so many benefits to it. And so I just want to leave you with a reminder that difficult flashes do not happen often. So it should not be a marker of success or failure. It's really just leaning into that learning process, being open to it, and taking whether or not you flash something with a grain of salt. I had an example from this summer where I went to go try a climb, and like I said, I try to flash every single climb I get on, even if it's something I don't necessarily think I can flash. And I kind of worked myself up. I watched a bunch of beta videos. I got on the climb and I fell on the first move. And the first move was an inch off of the ground. So, that just goes to show difficult flashes are hard to come by. So don't put too much weight onto those. All right, so lastly, we are going to talk about the process of trial and error. So climbing is 99% failure. I'm sure you have some idea of that if you've been climbing for a little bit. And, our active participation in this sport is us accepting, okay, like I'm going to be falling a lot. I'm going to be failing a lot. And being open to that is so important, and being open to learning from it, because that's what's ultimately going to help you become a better climber, is taking all of those failed attempts as, okay, I'm learning something from each time that I fall. And there are a number of tactics that you can use when you are going through this trial and error process. One of the big ones that I am a big proponent of is video. So I say, if you're trying to figure out a climb, an outside pair of eyes is the most useful tool that you can have. So if you're able to take video of yourself, you're going to have that outside view of yourself. There's only so much information you can get while you're on the wall. And if you're able to take a step back, watch through a video of yourself, you're going to be able to see a lot of things that you might not have seen otherwise. Another is climbing with a partner or friends. So again, this is a really good aspect of having a community, is being able to workshop moves together. Each of you try it, you learn from each of those tries, you try and get creative, bouncing ideas back and forth. Again, just having that outside pair of eyes. And then lastly, you can hire a coach. And so it's taking that outside pair of eyes and having it be an expert pair of eyes. So if you are having trouble recognizing those patterns in your climbing and you just want to have a trusted professional to bounce those ideas around with, hiring a coach can be a really great option. And then, as you go through this process, just break it down for yourself. So we're going to watch John go through this projecting process with this white climb. And this is a very abbreviated version of the process. Didn't happen as quickly as 3 tries. So we're going to go ahead and watch his flash attempt on the left here to start. All right, so what's one thing that we saw through this flash process? Like we literally saw those inner workings on that video where originally he thought that the move was to go right hand. He went up right hand and he was like, nope, that is not good. That does not feel good. So he came back and then tried to do that next move. So he learned a lot of information from that first try. And another thing you can do is you don't necessarily have to try each attempt from the start. If you fall on a move and you're like, I really just want to figure out that move, you can absolutely just start, pull up on some jugs, get situated, and just try that move in isolation. So here's his next go. So now he knows not to use the right hand. He goes straight for that left hand. And then he realizes, okay, this next move is also a bit tricky. It's very nuanced the way he has to move his body on these like less than ideal holds. And so again, he pulls on to try these moves again. He now has this left hand move down well. And now he's just trying to figure out the body positioning for this right hand move. And it's just a really subtle kind of bounce in. And then he was able to do it from there to the top. So again, we're just watching this critical thinking process in motion, where he's just figuring out the subtleties of these moves. All right, and so now we'll watch him put it all together. Yay, John! Woo! So a couple of things that you might have noticed from the progression through the videos. First is that he was able to climb this beginning section quite a bit quicker with a lot more confidence since he had done it before. He knew how to do it. And then also this kind of crux move of this delicate stab to the right hand was a lot harder in sequence with a little bit less energy. So again, just watching this in real time definitely looks very hard. I'll try it once my finger is healed. All right, so thank you so much for watching through all of that. And I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And we'll open it up for some question and answer.